You all are so sweet and funny in the comments. I can't even, Peter. Amazing. Hello everyone. Happy Thursday. Excited to be with you all here at another Athena webinar. Woohoo! All can you like give some love for this new like vibe that I'm wearing? I'm doing like the vest over a turtleneck thing. I don't know if it's cool or not, but I'm enjoying it. Thank you, Jess. I'm loving it. Thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. For anyone who's new here, let me introduce myself. My name is Melanie Naranjo. I head up the people team here at Athena. We're a compliance training company. We do everything from harassment prevention and cybersecurity all the way to hotline and case management. And we are so excited to have you here on this call with us today. We are so thrilled to partner with HR teams across the globe. And so one of the things we like to do to help really further that is to help build community and spread knowledge through these webinars with topics like employee terminations, which, let's be real, people can be a little nervous talking about. With that said, let me share some sort of things to expect on this call. Again, for anyone who's new, I like to make these super interactive because nobody wants to be talked at for an hour. So my ask to you all is please be active in the comments. I will ask you all questions. Put your responses in the comments. If you don't want to be called on, because I call on people, if you don't want to be called on, please, in your response, when you're responding, put an asterisk next to your response, and that will be my cue not to call on you. So if you're cooking, if you're doing the laundry and you're like, hell no, Melanie, not today. Just put an asterisk and I won't call on you. I don't want that to be a deterrent to you participating. Ace, who is working behind the scenes, will give you unmute access. And at that point, you will unmute. So thank you all. I'm very excited to introduce Jess Ewan today. Jess is actually an Athena advisor. Jess and I go way back. We have been partnering together since I joined Athena over 2.5 years ago. I remember being starry-eyed and so nervous as I was joining Athena. It was my first time at a tech startup, and she really coached me through this. We meet monthly. She gives me great advice, a lot of my thoughts. Thank you. Thank you to Jess for helping me coach me through so much. So I'm so excited to be having Jess on the call with us today. She's just full of wisdom. And also, for anyone who's looking for an executive coach, she offers executive coaching services and coaching services in general. Don't worry, we will be sharing her info afterwards, so keep an eye out. With that said, Jess, I told you this. I'm terrible at intros. I want to give you the mic. Is there anything that you would like to share about yourself and your experience with the audience today?
Yes, well, I want to say, you mentioned how sometimes we don't want to talk about this topic. And to be honest, when Melanie first asked me, my knee-jerk reaction was like, no, thank you. I'm good not talking about this in a public forum with so many people. But the thing that really got me here was one, Melanie, because she's amazing. And I knew this would be a great, deep conversation. But two, I really think our professions, the we are on the front lines of a massive change of how we do HR. And it's so exciting. And I think the best thing that we can do is be learning from each other and being community with each other, such that the tide raises all boats, right? I am a former chief people officer. I've been at a few companies in that capacity. And the interesting thing you might find about me and my experience is that I come from outside. I didn't grow up in the HR world. I have tons of respect, and I actually think it's the function that has the power to have the most impact in an organization. But I actually studied engineering. I did some business stuff. I did some product stuff. I did some operation stuff. And then I found my way to the people space because who can deny how amazing it is here? But I love working with my clients who are a lot of founder CEOs at amazing startups, but also executives at companies of all sizes. And so I'm excited to be here today and talk with Melanie and all of you about this really tricky topic. Frankly, it's getting it's trickier in this day and age, I will say.
100%. And also, just don't downplay yourself. You literally headed up the people team at Gusto a few years ago. What are you talking about? Like, you are officially in the people world. Come on, come on.
Yeah, but here's a secret. Like when I was in the head of people role, like I had done dabblings of things like a little bit of L&D and a little bit of like HR ops but like the first time I terminated somebody, I was a head of people and I felt a lot of pressure to try to get it right.
Okay.
And like between you and me and all of our viewers here, it's like I was so nervous that I needed to be consoled, before going into the conversation. And that's something we don't often talk about is how much it takes as an HR professional to be able to handle terminations, and there's so much of our work that is unseen, and this is a big piece of it, is the preparation, the actually doing of it, and then the aftermath that comes with it. So I know we have so many great juicy
Yeah.
questions to dive into, and I know we're going to continue to kind of peel the onion on this.
So true. And I don't know if you're seeing, but you're getting some love in the comments and these little heart emojis that I still don't know how to do. I'm a Zoom noob in many ways. So you're getting a lot of love for those comments. And yeah, we're gonna dig deep. So let's jump into it all. Let's do an agenda for everyone. So we're gonna share some disclaimers, like we're not lawyers, all that stuff, right? And then what we will get to, the meat of the thing of the topic. We're gonna talk about employee terminations. We'll talk about the discussion itself. What do we say? How do we show enough empathy? What's too much emotion? What's not enough emotion? All those gray area questions that we all have, the logistics, and then we'll talk about the decision, right? How do we know that this was the right move to make? How do we know when it's time to make a layoff? How do we know when it's time to terminate for someone for performance? And then, as always, we'll do a quick Athena spotlight, just sharing a little bit about what we do as a company, and we will then. I'm going to work so hard. It's a juicy topic, so I'm going to try. I can't promise, but I will try so hard to leave at least 10 minutes for Q&A because you all sent in some fire questions. You all are still thinking about Brittany Peach. I'm telling you, we got so many questions about TikTok recordings. We'll get there all. We'll get there all. Okay. So with that said, let's do a quick disclaimer. And also, I'm noticing people put an asterisk in the comments. Love it. Practicing. Great. The only reminder is please include the asterisk when you respond to the questions that I ask, and it'll be very clear. It's a pulse check question. That's how I'll know. Don't call on me for my answer. Okay. With that said, disclaimers. First and foremost, Jess and I are not lawyers. This is not legal advice. I want to be very, very clear. You should always consult an attorney, someone in employment law, if you have a legal question. We are sharing our thoughts from a people perspective. Additionally, this was a great flag from Jess. We are sharing from the perspective of at-will employers. So do keep in mind that certain things, if we say, and you are at a company where it's not at will, if you're based out of Montana, if you're based in the UK, if you're based in France and Montreal, right? You may have different laws. So please do keep that in mind. All right, with that said, let's get this party started and jump into the meat of it. And before I forget, I just want to share, because this has come up in the past. I love in these webinars to get into like the gray area versus just like reading a list of things that you can do. But Jess has partnered with us. She's going to be sharing a checklist at the end following this. So I think in the next couple of days, you all will get an email. So keep an eye out for that email. It will be a checklist with A to Z, all the things to like ask yourself and do pre, during, and post employee terminations, so you don't miss a thing. So I promise if we don't go through the super details, don't worry, it's going to be covered in a follow-up. Just keep an eye out for your emails. With that said, let's jump into it with our first pulse question. Okay, y'all, this is where you're going to put the asterisk next to your response if you don't want me to call on you, okay? My question to you all is, on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being super agree, 1 not at all, how much do you agree with the following statement? My first experience terminating an employee, 10 out of 10 experience, was amazing. Would have recommend to all. It went perfectly. I felt so good. It was the best day of my life. Okay, I'm getting, wow, look at this fire. I feel like people feel very sure. I got -1 girl. I got -100. Okay, I got to call on one girl, Annalise Fosnight. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Annalise, Annalise. If you could unmute yourself, Ace in the background is going to give you access. Unmute yourself. Why do you give this a 1 out of 10, 1 out of 5? What do you mean you didn't love your first experience terminating an employee? Tell me more. I'm so confused. I'll give you a quick second. If you don't unmute, I'll assume it's Annalise, Ace, Annalise. Yep, there she is. There you go. Annalise, go
Okay.
ahead and mute yourself.
Hi, I'm here.
Hi, Annalise, what do you mean you don't love terminating employees? Why was that not a great experience for you? I'm so confused.
Oh no. So my experience was probably like the worst first time experience someone can have. So the person completely shut down and refused to say a word, like literally anything. This associate was a little bit funky to work with. So we had like a performance plan for them, and we had to send them multiple final warnings being like, hey buddy, we really just need you to stop doing this, because he was spreading misinformation around the company saying that we were in like a crisis. We weren't. And so in the termination, they just completely shut down, would not respond to us. And I literally, this was my first termination. I had to be like, all right, like, I'm gonna give you like 2 minutes. If you have any questions for me or your lead, like, you have this time, but if you refuse to speak to us, we'll have to ask, like, we have to escort you out. And it was brutal. It was rough.
That is so brutal. Thank you for sharing in particular, because
Yeah.
we're an all remote company, but I remember the days of being in an office where it's literally like you're worried about your own security. You're worried about if you need to notify security, if you're going to have to escort. So that is so rough, especially because I can just imagine. I mean, how did you feel? Like you're doing such a typical HR thing. You're focusing on the employee, but how did you feel, Annalise, going through that?
I honestly, like, we ended up calling like risk management because we were just like worried for our own safety because it was
Mhm.
me and the team lead was also a woman. And we were just a little bit fearful about because we were terminating a man and we were like, oh my gosh, like this is a nightmare. Cause yeah, it was a scary termination. And I was just like, all
Oh,
right, we're gonna figure this out. But
I'm
it was tough.
I'm so sorry to hear that. I have just one final follow-up question for you, and then I will let you go. Uh,
Sure.
Tell me how well equipped did you feel going into that call? How much training did you said it was your first termination experience. How much training did you receive going into it?
Very little, which
Yeah.
yeah, I was like, that probably doesn't speak very well for like where I come from. But
Oh,
like honestly, I felt well equipped, but it was just like managing that reaction
yeah.
was like a crazy improv class where there was no yes and it was just like nothing.
Just wow, just to validate your experience so you don't feel alone. Can I get a +1 in the comments if you also feel like you had to do your first employee termination with little to no training on effective employee Yep. Yep. Uh-huh. That's why we're doing this webinar. All. I remember my first ever employee termination. My manager was like, Melanie, quick pep talk. You're gonna say this, you're gonna say that. If they get upset, just walk away. That's the like that was my training. I had a few minutes before she just pulled me over. She was like, this is happening, you're going in, go do it. And I was not prepared. And I feel bad too, because for the record, like we're joking about this, all this stuff. The reality is there's another person on the other side of this, right? And they're having a very real experience, and how trained or not trained we are is going to impact their experience. And it's a traumatizing moment, right? It's a traumatizing moment that they will remember forever. So Annalise, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. You were getting lots of love in the comments. Check it out if you haven't had a chance to. Jess, let's bring it over to you. What
Yeah.
goes through your mind hearing about some of these experiences and seeing the comments and seeing how many people went through this without training?
I think this is what's so tricky about HR is that so many of us are in these roles and haven't had training, or we don't have somebody to be learning from that are near us. And so I do think we are fortunate in the last few years to have more content available online that we now in the day and age of AI, who knows, maybe there will be like more coming from that angle and through platforms like Athena having training available in a way that gives some structure to it. I think the other thing coming to mind is like, even if you have all the logistics prepared, I was lucky enough in my first one, I had somebody on my team who like prepped all the paperwork old school style and, walked me through with paper clips on each piece of paper. But the other part of it is that emotional side. And I think there's two elements that we think about, right? One is our own management in that moment of this. I loved how Annalise framed it, this crazy improv class that we are kind of in at that moment of like, what are we going to get? Is it going to be crazy and people screaming at me? Are they going to shut down and I get nothing? Is it something in between? But it is that other side of like, this person, their world is being disrupted and we can't change that part of it, and we are the ones at delivering the news on it. And I think that's the other piece that makes termination so tricky, because how do human beings deal with change? Even the ones who claim they want change, not good, right?
So tricky. I remember feeling like, wow, I'm literally impacting someone's livelihood. And this is a person I haven't personally worked with, maybe, in many cases, right? Where it's like, HR, come and do this thing. And you just feel like, really? How? With that said, let's get into some specifics. I know you all came in for some good advice. So Jess, I'd love to get your experience and your perspective. I want to jump right into it. I think most times the scariest thing is the call itself, the discussion. Who's in the room? Who delivers the message? How much information do you give? Are you, you're trying to balance, like, I'm communicating the message, but I don't want them to feel like I'm a wall and I'm completely robotic. Talk to me a little bit about how that conversation goes.
Yeah, so in the room, and this is an ideal situation, right? We don't always have ideal, but my ideal is that there's the hiring manager and HR in the room jointly together, and that the hiring manager has been prepped ahead of time, has a script, and is, can actually deliver the script. I know sometimes they go off. But the reason for having both there is a couple of reasons. One, if anything gets forgotten, HR can jump in and help support the manager in the delivery of the messaging. If the employee is reacting in a way that we aren't anticipating, many times it is directed at the manager, and so we can exit them from the conversation and then just have a one-on-one with the manager and the employee. And then for the second half of the conversation, once the reasoning for termination has been given, I like for HR to run the logistics. Here's, if you're getting severance, here's the details of that. If you need to contact the company for any information, here's who to contact, and here's when you can be expecting the next steps in this process. I
I
would say,
Oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. Carry on.
oh no, I mean, the other piece is, there are rare circumstances where I have requested legal to join. So one example of this is there was an employee where they were threatening to sue the company, and they had been doing this in the weeks leading up to their termination. And so as we were weighing the pros and cons and the capacity of everybody involved, we decided that legal should be sitting in the room and observing and present for that termination, to ensure that we were handling it in a very, professional manner, and that, liability was being taken into consideration for it.
Okay, quick poll time. I'm curious. In the comments, can I get a +1 if you've ever had to terminate an employee who every step of the way was using very legal, scary terms like, discrimination, I'm going to sue. Yes. Okay. So, okay, we're getting a lot. So this is a very common thing. I'm really glad that you flagged that, Jess. Sometimes the right move is to make sure you bring in another party to that conversation to make sure you've got ample coverage. And I have to agree with you. I actually, I'm a big fan, and I'd be curious. Give me another, like, +1 in the comments if you also do this. I actually ask the manager to leave as soon as they've finished delivering their part, because I don't want the employee to think that there's room to negotiate or they're still part of this. And now the manager is sitting through while I'm talking about this very emotional, very, like, their own personal details around the severance package or anything like that. Okay, getting a lot of +1s.
That's a great clarification. I plus one that as well.
Yeah, no worries at all. I say this because I know that not everyone does this. And so if you at your company have your manager sit there while the HR person's going through everything, I think you may want to rethink that. You may want to rethink just having the manager hop up. It's going to be better for the manager. It's going to be better for the direct report. It's going to be better for you. Jess, I want to go one level deeper, because I think everyone is probably, like, just like thirsting for this. What language do you recommend? Assuming, right, like, my understanding is the manager is the one who communicates the message. The HR person waits till the manager communicates the message, and then we go into logistics, payroll, benefits, all that stuff. What do you recommend is a suitable script for for the manager when they are delivering this message? What should they say? What does that look like?
Okay, so the first thing I will caveat before I get into a script is keep it brief. This is for a few reasons. One, and the very HR piece is like, yes, we want to minimize liability for the company and what we say, but more importantly, and Annalise's example actually highlights this. Many on the other side of the table, they are either going into shock or they want to flee because they're going into fight or flight. They don't really want to listen to a long explanation of what's going on. They just need to understand that they're being terminated and understand when their last day is, and where else, hand them the packet or email it to them, or whatever the situation entails, whether it's, in person or not. A script I might start with is something like, thank you for meeting today. this is a difficult conversation and I want to be direct with you. So we're going to go straight into the meat of this. Um, and then take about one sentence to explain why the termination is happening, which is along the lines of due to company structuring, your role is being eliminated, or due to performance reasons, your role is being eliminated. And after careful consideration, this decision was not an easy one, and your last day of employment is going to be on, and then fill in the blank of whether it's today or whenever it's happening. So it's about 3 or 4 sentences. Try to keep it concise, get the main pieces out there.
I would agree with that entirely. And I think something in particular, and we'll probably talk about this some more towards the end, something that I like to really throw in there as well is I like to tie it to things that have happened in fact that we have documentation about. So that there's no confusion around like, what are you talking about? Where is this going? So usually like if it's a performance-based conversation, for example, I always have the manager say something like, as you know, we have been talking about your failure to perform over the past few months. Unfortunately, you have not improved meaningfully enough in order to stay with the company. And so today we have made the difficult decision. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that way, it like really ties it in. I saw a question, do you have to give a reason? I have thoughts, but Jess, what is your take on, well, do you have to? Can you just say like goodbye, last day? What are your thoughts on that, Jess?
So technically in an at-will employment agreement, you do not have to give a reason, right? It's at will. You can, for any reason on either side, terminate employment. However, and I think this is coming up in the comments too, is employees, they take to other avenues to vent, to complain, to come back. And so I think some piece of it, and I love, Melanie, that you're emphasizing, hey, if we have been having these conversations over periods of time about your performance, or if there's a track record for it that we can point to, it is helpful to understand and process, like, why is this happening? I think as humans, we want to know, why me? Why now? What's the case? And so if we're not getting answers in that conversation, then we're going to go seek them elsewhere.
I 100% agree. I think there's really you really touched on two important avenues, right? Like one is the liability perspective, which is in the absence of information, employees or past employees will fill that in with their own assumptions, often incorrect and often worse than anything that is true or what you could have said. And so from a liability perspective, I agree. It just provide the reason. I will also say the second point, Jess, that you point out, so critical, right? From a human perspective, I'm seeing on the comments, unfortunately, many of us in the HR world have been impacted by terminations very recently, long ago. My heart goes out to everybody who's ever suffered from this. Anyone who has ever experienced being terminated, I understand, like in some cases, we're being a little bit cavalier. We're trying to have fun on this call. And also, again, acknowledging this is a horrible moment in someone's life. They are never going to forget this moment. And so to the extent that you can make it as human as possible and help give some closure and provide clarity without putting the company at risk, right? I agree. I think you should. What I don't think you should do is try and litigate, like, here are the 3 things that you didn't do that we talked about. That now gives the wrong impression, right? That like, oh, let's break this down. Let's agree or disagree. But to give the reason, I agree, Jess, right? Like, I think we might as well. It's sort of like, it's the most humane way to do this, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to strike a rather tricky balance here, right? Between just enough information so that they know, okay, it's performance, or there was a restructuring that's outside my control, or this was the thing I was supposed to be working on and I didn't, and I had a bunch of conversations, but also with the person, most of the time, this goes for performance discussions too, right? Like if an underperformer has this long list that we're going through point by point, they tend to get defensive, they tend to get, less acceptable of being able to listen in that moment. And so we're also balancing that part of the human equation.
Let's dig in there, actually. I'm curious to know. I hear this all the time, and I personally, like, I just want to validate. I personally have experienced this question and uncertainty. How do you balance empathy while being really clear around the messaging and not misleading them around the severity of the situation and the fact that this is not up for discussion? How much emotion is too much emotion? How much is too little? I know people always ask the question, like, can you say sorry on one of these calls? What's your take? How do you balance that human perspective, that human element while delivering this very terrible news?
Yeah, and I think you're asking, like, there's such a good set of questions that are coming through in the chat as well. Uh, I think there's two pieces to this. One side is, how do we set expectations on what this conversation is about? And it's actually not a conversation. It is a information news update, frankly, of, the decision has already been made. It's not up for discussion. And having a statement along those lines, if the employee is starting to try to have a conversation or try to negotiate, is, firmly but kindly saying, I understand that you want to talk about this, but the decision has already been made. And this is not a conversation where we're able to change that decision, and it will not be changing. Right. I think the other part of it on the emotion, how much is too much? If we're sitting there crying alongside the employee, that's too much emotion. But I think it is both in the words that we are saying, acknowledging this is a difficult situation. I understand that you're surprised, acknowledging the emotions that come into it as part of it. And then we also have our nonverbals too, right? So, up front in the conversation, I noticed, Melanie, people were saying things and you were feeling them in your heart. And we put our hands over our heart when we do that. We soften our voices, we soften our faces. And I think there's a way to say, today's your last day, that feels very different than today's your last day. Thank you for your service, right? Like monotone, we're not showing the expression. So I do think being aware of how we're coming across, and this might be the one time, keep your Zoom camera on if it's remote so that you can see how you're coming across and make sure that it's matching the messaging that you want.
Can we double click on that? I'm actually curious to know if I'm alone in this. This is genuine. Can you all give me a +1 if you ever in your HR career were given the impression that the best approach is to eliminate all emotion from your face when communicating a difficult decision? Okay. Yeah. Okay. I remember early on in my career, I was trained to be completely monotone because you didn't want to give the impression that you disagreed with the decision, or that you were upset, or thought this was the wrong decision, or showing too much emotion and making this about you. I was trained not to be emotive. And I think honestly, there's been like this massive shift in the past few years for the better, because this is a human experience and we should be showing that emotion. I have a follow-up question for you, Jess, which is, I think sometimes people forget that there are distinctions between different types of terminations. There's termination for performance, there's termination for cause, there's termination for job elimination. My question to you is, in your opinion, does the communication and does the emotion, can it change? Does the wording change depending on the type of termination that you are delivering?
Ooh, this is such a good question, right? There's a world where you don't need to change anything, right? You could just have the same similar script with a slightly different phrase injected for each of those. Um, but I will say, like, the level of emotion that we feel attached to each of those different situations might be quite different. And so I do think figuring out, without saying something like, wow, the company made a big mistake, that does feel like we should we should continue that standard of not saying, hey, we disagree with this. But I would say, hey, if someone's leaving and it's involuntary and they didn't necessarily do anything, like it's a restructuring, that does feel different than somebody who like clearly violated the code of conduct multiple times or was very egregious in their behavior. And I do think it's fair that we would be different in those situations as well.
I would agree with that. And I think a lesson that I had to learn the hard way was around job eliminations in particular, because I saw a comment, I think it was Bronson, who talked about like, is saying sorry human or is it a liability? I think in particular when it's a job elimination, what I have learned is it's okay, and in some cases even necessary, for the other person to have closure to say sorry in those cases. Like, I am sorry, you are genuinely losing your job due to no fault of your own. It was a business mistake. We made a mistake. And I am so sorry to have to deliver this message. And I am here to try and help you however I can. And we've seen this, right? In social media, we've seen people sharing lists, when people volunteer and agree to share their information, putting together more generous packages that offer career counseling and all those sorts of things. I genuinely believe now I do treat terminations case by case depending on the context, and it does for me impact how I approach those conversations. I'm keeping an eye on the clock also. Let me move on to my last question in this particular section. I know the conversation itself is super juicy. If you have other questions that we didn't get to, please put it in the Q&A and we'll try to get to as many as possible. If there are too many, maybe we just do a part two. I don't know. My question to you is, and Jess, you sort of got into this and I was like, oh, we're going to come back here. What do you do if the conversation goes off the rails? What do you do if the person becomes belligerent? What do you do if they start negotiating, or worse, they start yelling at you? And I've been cursed out on some of these. Like, what do you do when that person is now turning this into an attack on you, the messenger?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where understanding and hopefully to the extent that we can anticipate or plan for is way easier than we don't. So if we know this person has a track record or history, it's sometimes you're already thinking of these things like, oh, if they start yelling at me, what are my boundaries? And if the boundaries are being crossed, we at that point try to close down the conversation and exit it. We're not in a place where we're discussing this. I know you have things to say. Here's the appropriate avenues for that. Is there anything else? And then try to leave. I think in cases where like physical safety is at risk for the in-person, I know it's becoming less common because many of us are working hybrid or remotely or doing terminations remotely. But if physical situations are at risk, that is something where, how do we make sure that there's somebody aware that this is happening and can be very close by to help support us in it? I would say that maybe the most extreme situation that I had was an employee who threatened suicide when they were being terminated. And it was back in the day, so it wasn't an in-person termination. And I was the head of people, but I was not conducting this one directly. Somebody on my HR team was, and she was she handled it very professionally and very supportive. But we were balancing two things, right? And of course, the very first piece of it is the human part. This person is threatening their life. So we wanted to make sure that their physical safety was of utmost importance. And then the other part, of course, was like the company's role in this and how liability and all that stuff was going to play out. And so she was in the room with that individual. It took about 8 hours for this to all play out. But the employee contacted a trusted friend to meet them at home. She escorted him home, waited with him until that friend was able to come and be with them and make sure that they were physically safe. And then all the while staying exactly what we've been trying to figure out. How do you balance it? Is we care for you as a human. We want to make sure that you are physically okay. But at the same time, she was balancing like, we are not giving you your job back. We can't do that. And I think that was really, really tricky. And she handled it brilliantly in the moment. But these are some of the crazy situations that I know many of us have been going through as we've been coming up against it. And HR is so much about these one-offs. Like it's not until you have this happen that you start to think about these contingency plans. So there's part of it is how much can we plan for and anticipate? And then for the unplanned things, thinking about resources. So my HR person did excuse herself at a couple of moments. We made sure somebody else was watching the room to come and make sure that we had time to power and figure out, okay, what do we do? What are the contingencies? Who else do we need to bring into this? What are the other resources that we have available to us?
Wow, that is just wild. And I'm seeing some stories in the comments. I won't call anyone by name in case you don't want this to be called out in the recording, but I just want to say I'm seeing your comments all. My heart goes out to everybody. These really are stories that impact multiple people, and they impact lives. Jess, thank you so much for sharing that story with it. It's just wild. Like how do you come back from a moment like that? It sounds like you all handled it so beautifully. And I think what I really appreciate is the reminder to everyone, right, that we aren't robots. And sometimes you need to break protocol and take a step back and, okay, forget the termination discussion for a second. How do we take care of this person? How do we take care of ourselves? How do we handle right in this moment beyond any rules or guidance that we've been given? What is the right human thing to do in this moment? Woof. I also appreciate and saw this in the comments as well, right? Like when things go off the rails, it's okay to just remind them what this call is about and end the discussion. Hey, I'm so sorry. This discussion is no longer productive. This is not a negotiation. This is me sharing this information with you. If you are not ready in this moment to hear that information, let me know. I can send this to you in a follow-up email. But as of right now, this is what we can talk about, and that's the only scope of things that I'm able to address for you right now on this call. And I want to acknowledge, that's probably going to be disappointing for many people. It's probably not the answer they want to hear. And also, it is the kindest thing you can do for them versus stringing them along and trying to answer questions incorrectly or trying to answer questions that you, quite frankly, don't have authority to answer. That's part of why I recommend asking the manager to hop off, because the scope of topics then really does get much more limited. You can focus on topic, focus on logistics. And sometimes you just have to know when to move on from the discussion and very politely let them know this is the end of the discussion. And if not, we can end this call. We can end this discussion. With that said, let's do some very quick logistics. Rapid fire. I'm going to do like 2 to 3 rapid fire logistics questions. And then we'll ask one quick question on the decision. So, Jess, rapid fire. We got a couple of like very in the weeds questions. So I wanted to get a few of these in. And reminder, everyone, Jess has so thoughtfully collaborated with us on putting together a checklist, again, that we will be sharing via email with Jess's contact information around everything to do A to Z, pre, during, and post employee termination. So with that said, Jess, best time of day to terminate. Does it matter?
Yeah, and Zumin is actually asking time of week as well. So I prefer
Ooh.
morning and I prefer end of week. 2 reasons, and I'll be quick about this. I've tried end of day and I feel like a terrible person for making them work the entire day before we give them the news at the end of it. The other reason for end of week is because terminations tend to be distracting for employees. And so when it happens at the beginning of the week, you essentially lose productivity for a lot of that week. And so doing it on like a Thursday or Friday allows you a chance to have the information go out, to be able to tell the rest of the organization, and for them to have Friday, rest of Friday or the weekend, to be able to process it and decompress and come back to a new week.
I really like that. And the only like asterisk that I put on that I would add to that is I found that Thursday is better than Friday, because sometimes if they need that data process and then they have questions on the weekend and you're not answering their emails, it's a really rough experience that they have questions and you're not available, versus on a Thursday they sleep on it and then that Friday you can answer their questions. But I agree, end of
Yeah,
week is better.
I agree. And if you can't do a Thursday for whatever reason, I actually, to your point, it's probably like Wednesday would even be
Yeah.
better than Friday for exactly that.
Mm. Okay, next rapid fire question. What if a term bumps up against a holiday or just before a planned vacation? Do you just not do it? Do you wait till after the holiday? What do you do? Before holiday, after holiday, what's better?
This is so tricky because early in my career, I was taught, or early in my HR career, I was taught like wait till after. And now actually my thinking has changed because especially with the holidays, I find around the New Year's, a lot of people are planning for their lives, at least for the next year, if not longer than that. Um, and I think this is one of the trickiest ones, but doing it as soon as we as a company know, to the extent possible, I think is better for everybody involved. There are nuances to that. So it's not a blanket statement, but even if it's almost at the holiday season, I have found that employees who've been impacted before the holidays, they go into the holiday season totally different. They plan out their next year totally differently. And when we wait till January, they have high hopes about their career at this company. And then they come in and are sort of, it's like even crashing further because they're like, shoot, I had all of these plans for the year and now I'm rethinking it all. And so I'm not as adamant of not doing it right up against those things as I used to be.
Okay, thank you, Jess. And I think for the record, I want to just comment that I do agree that this is a new perspective of thinking. And I think that it's all the more important then to start thinking in new ways. And so if any of you are sort of like, whoa, I never thought about it that way, I really invite you to question, like, is this the right approach for you? Maybe it is for one person, but it's not the right approach for another company or another person. I think with all these things, right, like there's no one right answer. But Jess, I really love that you're thinking about it in this new way that, for the record, has impacted the way that I think about it. As you all know, I talk with Jess plenty, so very helpful. Okay, last rapid fire question. All right, if it's virtual, how do you schedule it? Who jumps on the call? When? How do you do it? What if the person's just waiting for you? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, I feel like we have so many experts on this call, having been through a collectively so many. But if we have multiple people jumping onto this call, I would absolutely say set up your Zoom room or whatever meeting forum you're using virtually to not allow people in automatically, but to admit, so that you can make sure that the manager and the HR person, if those are the two people who are both there at the same time before the employee arrives. I mean, for those of us who've done this in person, it's the same thing virtually. Like, it's awkward if it's like HR person arrives and we see that the employee comes in, they're like, shoot. I would say on the actual meeting invite, this is where I've traditionally, and let me know if there's a new, better way of thinking of this, but traditionally I've done it as like, it's seen as a one-on-one between the manager and the employee. And so that gets scheduled as a not something different than usual. And then the HR manager is given the link separately to be able to join.
I'm gonna plus one on that, and I'm gonna acknowledge it just because, like, I think I understand when, like, the first reaction is like, oh, but like, like, is that dishonest? Is it like catching them by surprise? All the stuff. I think that, like, what I have learned both, like, from personal experiences and, like, people that I know that have gone through this experience, the worst thing is to, like, know it's coming for days and dreading it, and, like, you were just thinking about it for days on end. What is this call now? I'm spiraling, all these things. I've actually found that and, like, just from what I've heard from people, it's better just to, like, rip the Band-Aid off. When they join the call and they see HR on that call, they will know. They will know, and then at that point, do you know what I mean? And I think your point, Jess, is really well made, that there's no perfect way to do it's never not going to be uncomfortable. It's never not gonna feel like a terrible moment. But I think the question that we have to ask ourselves is, how can we make this just a little bit less horrible for this person? How can we make this just a little bit more bearable? And listen, I'm not saying that what Jess and I are saying is, like, right for you. Again, like, you may have different ways of doing this, but I think it's really helpful and important. And please drop in the comments if you approach these differently, to really explore the different ways that people do these things. The reason why I say this is, one of the reasons that we put these webinars together is nobody talks about these things. So we're all figuring it out on our own in a silo, instead of sharing these experiences so that we can together try and navigate and figure out what the best path is, or figure out maybe the way I've been doing it is not the right way to do it. I want to experiment. I want to try that approach. I think it's so important that we start putting some of these conversations out in the open. And I'm going to go one step further and say, I think it's even important to share this kind of thing with your employees. How will they know when their job is at risk? How will they know when we are going to have this conversation? What will that conversation look like if it happens? I think knowing helps. It takes a lot of the pain away. It also helps them feel, comfortable that it's being done equitably. This is the process. I can mentally prepare myself for it. I know what I'm saying is a little bit jarring. Who talks to their employees about what termination looks like? But I think truly we're in this new era of transparency, and quite frankly, I'm into leaning into it. I don't understand the reason for secrecy. We all know how these things go. Why not talk about it and give everyone, put everyone on a level playing field, so everybody understands how these processes work. I know I, being in HR, really appreciate having this context, so that if it ever happens to me, I will be mentally and emotionally prepared. I would really like to do my part to help do the same for other employees who maybe don't have the same access to this information that we as HR professionals do. With that said, okay. Oh, please
The
go
one
ahead,
thing I was
Jess.
just going to add to that is just in the termination process, one thing I work with companies on is, as much as we focus rightfully so on the impacted employee, we should be, if not more so in some cases, thinking about the employees are still there, right? Because it impacts company culture, it impacts the way that we work and our productivity around it. And so employees are actually, to your point of being transparent about it, they're looking at this individual and how they're being treated, thinking, if this were me, this is exactly how I would be treated, or this is how the company approaches it or thinks about performance, about communication, about so many things, about how much we care about employees generally. And so just a big plus one, Melanie, of like, how much of this conversation can we start to have? And I think it's everyone, even the highest performers have that question when they see somebody who's underperforming. How is that handled? When am I going to know that I'm no longer doing the thing I'm supposed to be doing? And then what's the extreme version if I actually need to exit the company, and what that looks like?
And I like flip side of that too, which is like knowing what it will look like when it's happening means that you can stop worrying when it's not happening, right? Like I've
Yeah.
talked to lots of employees over my career who are constantly worried, is my job at risk? And, it's so nice at Athena that I can very clearly say, if we have not communicated the explicit words, your job is at risk, you're good. You're good, right? And so like the more clarity you can provide, right? People can just like take their brain power and focus elsewhere versus wondering when I'm going to get caught by surprise. And I just want to clarify because the comment I made about like, oh, people worrying like days on end. What I don't mean is you should be unclear when someone's job is at risk. You should be clear when someone's job is at risk. What I do mean is I'm not a fan of putting time on someone's calendar with HR and scheduling it for tomorrow. And now that person can't sleep that night. They can't eat. They're like really stressed out for those 24 hours until the meeting. I think it's better to, if they already have a standing one-on-one with their manager, you use that meeting versus unnecessarily forcing extra panic. You should have already done the work of communicating their job was at risk, right? Weeks ago, right? Months ago, depending on how long your performance improvement process is. But that day when you make that decision, I don't see the point in ruining someone's night, someone's weekend, someone's day. I think you just rip the Band-Aid off. Okay, with that said, we are running short on time. So here's what I'm going to do. Jess, I'm going to make a longer question, a rapid fire question, and then we're going to open it up to, we're going to do next steps and then Q&A. I just think this is an important one because we talked about this a lot on LinkedIn, and I just feel like people expressed a lot of curiosity around this. How do you pressure test to make sure that you're making the right decision when you are terminating someone? A manager comes to you and they're like, we got to get rid of this person, or a leadership person comes to you and they're like, I'm done with this person, get rid of them. Like, how do you pressure test that that's the right decision?
Okay, so rapid fire response, I get curious. I want context. I want to understand, how did you get to this conclusion? So I'm not making a judgment whether it's right or wrong. I want to understand, what body of evidence do you have that's led you to this conclusion, right? What have you seen from the employee? What discussions have you had? What expectations have been set? You want what documentation has existed or not existed? Help me understand. You're at your, I'm done with this person. I'm so over it. Just get them out of here. And I'm in the, okay, I want to get to where you are as soon as possible. So help me get there.
Whoops, I'm on. Sorry, I was muted. I love that so much, in particular, because I think something we don't talk about as much when it comes to employee terminations is the piece of things where HR behind the scenes is advocating for that employee. And I want to be really clear here because I don't know that every HR person, as they're being trained, understands that that's part of their job. Part of your job is to advocate for employees and to make sure that this is the right decision that you are making. It is not just to terminate because someone says they want to terminate. It's to really pause and make sure you're being reflective and think about, first of all, is this the right decision? And if it is the right decision, what is the most humane way to do this to give the person as much dignity and grace as possible? Things like making sure you do it on a Thursday, doing it in the morning, not making them lose nights of sleep while you schedule this really scary meeting on their calendar. So I really, really love that point there. Let's very quickly do an Athena spotlight. Can you all see my screen? Is this working? Yeah. Is it working? Yeah.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great. Perfect. Okay, thank you all. I love the thumbs up. Okay, so real quick, I just want to share, Athena does offer management training that covers exactly this. Our management training covers the essentials like giving effective feedback, coaching, all that stuff. And also it covers things like how to effectively terminate an employee. Not because we're saying a manager does it solo, but because we want to equip managers with what are the right tools? What is the right language to use? What is the goal of a termination? What things should you say? What things shouldn't you say? These are all things that the more context the manager has, the better. So if you're curious about our training, please feel free to check it out. I'm sure Ace can drop a link in the comments. And please know that we offer special promotions for webinar attendees. So keep an eye out for our follow-up emails where we do offer certain discounts again for webinar attendees if you're interested in these trainings. I will also, we just snuck this one in because it's timely. If you're in California, we know about the new workplace violence prevention law. It's going into effect in a couple of months, and you will have to have a training set up. We offer that training. We've made it very brief so that you're taking up as little of your employees' time as possible while delivering a very high impact. Again, the promotion applies to this training as well. If you are interested, if you are if you are based out of California, if you have employees working out of California, please check out this training. And again, I'm sure Ace can drop a link in the comments. Lastly, I just want to share, as always, if you liked this training, post about it on LinkedIn and enter into a chance to win a $100 gift card. All you have to do is tag Athena and share one thing that you liked about this training. We will, by end of day tomorrow, select one lucky winner to win a $100 gift card of your choice between Amazon, Uber, and DoorDash. If you were here for SHRM or HRCI credits, here is your chance. Please write it down. While this is up, Ace, can you put up the poll? Before we do Q&A, we always like to ask you a couple of questions. We'd love if you could just take 10 seconds to read through the questions and give us your answers. This data is very helpful to us. I'm going to be quiet. Okay, all. With that said, feel free to close the poll, Ace, when you're ready. Let's jump into some questions. Ooh, okay. So, Jess, I'm gonna ask you. So this one's, I think, probably rapid fire. I'm curious to get your thoughts. Do you have to keep an employee on for their entire notice period? Um, uh, yeah. Do you have to keep an employee on for their entire notice period, or are you allowed to be like, no, thank you. Today's your last day?
Yeah, in at-will employment, you are under no legal obligation, to my understanding, on that. I think there's courtesy that's happening, right? And so part of when I see those notification periods shortening is because there isn't courtesy being shown on both sides, that the employee is maybe exhibiting toxic behavior or for whatever reason showing that they're not as productive as we need them to be in that time period, or that the expectations are being violated in some way, shape, or form. That's where I might see that happening as well. It's also one reason that I see more and more a choice being given to individual employees who are underperforming, where they can choose to go through a PIP period or not, and they can decide to exit immediately or go through the PIP and see if they can turn it around. And I do think that sometimes can help ameliorate that or mitigate that behavior.
I think that's super helpful. Big plus one. And the only thing I would add is I think sometimes if you're in a company where there's like a security concern because this person now has access, I don't know, to maybe in their role they have access to competitor information or something like that. Yeah, in those roles, you may just want to have an internal policy, whether written or not, where you do terminate effective immediately. I would recommend two things. One, that you be consistent about it so that you don't put yourself at risk for, being liable for discrimination charges. But two, in my opinion, you should pay the person out through 2 weeks. You should give them a traditional pay them out, but your last day is today. That way it's no hard feelings. I just, from security purposes, need to part ways with you, but like, here's 2 weeks pay. Okay, next question. Okay, Jess, you were touching on this. What should you communicate to the rest of your employees after termination? Like, what can you say?
Yeah, this is tricky too, because from company to company, I see there's very different kind of cultural acceptance levels of like who needs to know and how far. I would say, in 100,000 person company versus like a 10-person company, the extent of this communication is going to vary quite a bit depending on who exactly, like if your CEO is exiting the company, you're going to tell everybody. But if it's somebody who's an IC that maybe doesn't touch everybody in the organization, you wouldn't. What are you allowed to share? The smaller the company, the more that I've seen that companies will lean towards being more close to like the full enchilada on what's going on. I'm using a lot of food analogies today. Maybe it's an indicator that lunch is almost coming up in my time. But I would say that for what can you say, I think this is one of those things where I think it's wanting to be respectful to the employee and not disclosing everything. There's also legal pieces to it that you'll want to talk to your employment counsel about. But the other piece of it, I usually say it's a great dovetail into, hey, this person's exited. We want to wish them well on their journey. And here's like kind of the logistical pieces that employees need to know, which is often, how does this affect my work? I don't have this person to work with anymore. Who am I supposed to work with next? Or who am I reporting to if it's my manager that's no longer here? I think it also comes back to what you were saying, Melanie, is how do people understand that the whole process works more broadly for anybody, of how does underperformance get handled or how do exits get handled, and transparency. So I kind of ride the line between being respectful to the employee, sharing the news that it's happened, but also sharing kind of what the broader process is on and how do terminations and exits work and underperformance work at the organization. I also like to think in concentric circles. So typically right after the termination discussion happens, I think about who is the kind of the next sort of closest entity that they're dealing with. So usually it's their direct team, and then maybe the department, and then maybe the organization, and thinking differently about the level of communications for each of those audiences.
I think that's so important. I'm just going to throw this out. I'm curious for the people here on the call. Uh, so I think something people often actually plus one if you've ever experienced this, you have employees reaching out that are on the team that work with that person because they just tried to Slack that person and they can't find them. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it happens a lot. I agree 100%. Like you really need to think about like who are the immediate people that they work with, and how do you communicate to them as quickly as possible? Because it is a far worse experience to find out that way than through someone walking them through the process. Okay, I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions. Okay. TikTok, it's a thing. What advice do you have for HR professionals worried about being recorded during a termination discussion?
Oh my gosh, this new day and age, right? It's like layer after layer of things to be thinking about. I'll be honest with you that I've watched a few of these TikTok terminations, and I've thought, like, at least the ones that I've seen, the HR person actually handled it quite professionally and said all of the things that I think I would expect them to say. And so I think part of what it's highlighting is it's just a terrible situation, regardless of how you slice it and how well it's done. At no point is someone going to be like, wow, Melanie, well done. What a great termination you executed today. And so I think we do the same due diligence that we would for any other termination. We try to be respectful and professional. We try to make sure that we've, read all the legal, ins and outs that we need to know about. And we conduct it to the best of our ability. And if it gets recorded, it gets recorded. I don't think we are here for the entertainment or the performance piece of it, and we can't plan for that. But we just try to do our best to do our jobs.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna make a quick comment and then sneak in one quick question because I think we can squeeze this one in. Ace, can you drop in, if you haven't already, the link to our feedback survey? I say this because I would love for you to click on this link, open it up, and share your feedback with us. In particular, because there's a question at the end that asks, "What other topics would you like us to cover?" Up to and including if you all want a part two of employee terminations, because I saw some of the comments like I want more time, we can do that. Just give us the signal. So please fill out this employee survey, or sorry, this employee survey. Wow, this feedback survey, and let us know. We want to know what topics you want to hear so we can provide information that you care about. Okay, last question. I think I wish we had more time to chat about this one actually. But Jess, separation packages, how common are they? Should all companies do them? Only in some circumstances? Tell us just like briefly, what are your thoughts?
So I would first think about your company's financials. There are a number of companies where, you got to consider the longevity of the organization as part of it. We do have an obligation to make sure that the company can survive and sustain. That said, if your company can afford it, I am a big proponent of having consistency in the severance packages. And sometimes it's done by tenure, sometimes it's done as a formula according to level and tenure. But I would say trying to stay consistent in it. I'm also a big proponent in not just like how many weeks of salary that someone's getting, but having consistency. Like if you have folks on OTO or have kind of commission, like that we have a formulaic approach to that. And when thinking about benefits, there, Millie and I have talked about this before, is like whenever possible, making the last day like on the first day of the next month so that they have access to benefits for a little bit longer. If you can actually offer to cover COBRA or extended benefits for even longer than that in certain situations, I'm a big proponent of that. And nowadays I'm seeing more and more companies want to support with like career support. So resume reviews, interview prep, or even just kind of life coaching. I know these are all kind of above and beyonds and sort of really sweet extras, but when they happen, they're amazing. And one of the things I saw, especially during the pandemic, for recruiting teams that were being impacted, some companies were actually leveraging their recruiting teams to offer these career services as a way to help extend their longevity in employment at the company while also being able to do something of huge value for the organization for those who were being who were departing.
All, thank you so much for tuning in with us on this really fascinating, wild topic. It's a tough one. It's a tricky one. I appreciate the engagement in the comments. You all were great. It's really helpful for us to know what's resonating, what's not. Jess, freaking rock star. Can we get some love for Jess in the comments? Just give her little hearts, please. Just phenomenal. As always, it's always a fun chance and opportunity when I get to have an hour with you. I'm going to be at Unleash hanging out with Jess in a couple of weeks in Vegas. If you are at Unleash, please hit me up. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, reach out in the follow-up, respond to the emails we're sending. I want to meet up with you all. Jess, thank you so much. Let's see if we do a part 2. I don't know. All right. Thank you everyone so much and have a great rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.